Most men do not destroy their future in one dramatic decision. They do it in small private trades nobody sees. A little comfort here. A little distraction there. One more delay dressed up as I just need time. One more compromise disguised as I've been under a lot of pressure. One more night where they choose relief over repair, escape over discipline, mood over mission. And because nothing explodes immediately, they assume nothing serious was lost. But something was. It is never just the skipped workout, never just the text you sent because you felt lonely, never just the money you spent to feel in control for 10 minutes, never just the morning you slept through because yesterday was hard. The real loss is subtler than that. What gets traded away is momentum. Self-trust. Internal rank. The quiet authority a man builds when his actions begin to match the standard he claims to live by. That is the part most men never calculate. They measure the temporary relief. They do not measure the compound cost. He tells himself, the drink is just for tonight. The call to the wrong woman is just because the silence feels heavy. The impulse purchase is just because he deserves something after a brutal week. The extra hour in bed is just recovery. The long excuse is just context. The compromise is just being realistic. But life is not counting these moments the way he counts them. Life is watching the pattern. And patterns are where futures are either built or quietly dismantled. There is a man sitting in his car at 11:47 p.m. after another exhausting day. He knows his finances are slipping. He knows his body is softening. He knows his attention is fractured. He knows exactly what would help him tomorrow. Sleep, order, restraint, a clean morning. But instead, he reaches for whatever numbs him fastest. Food, scrolling, porn, alcohol, random validation. He tells himself he needs relief. What he really means is he cannot tolerate the weight of his own unfinished life for one more night. That is the transaction. The future asks for discomfort now. Relief offers comfort now and sends the bill later. And weak men always choose the invoice they do not have to read immediately. This is why so many men look shocked by their own lives at 30, 35, 40. They think decline arrived suddenly. It did not. It accumulated. Their future was not stolen from them. It was traded away in fragments. Each exchange so small it felt harmless. Each moment of softness defended by a story that sounded reasonable enough to survive the night. But reason is not the standard. The result is. The man who keeps choosing what feels good in the moment is not relaxing. He is liquidating tomorrow. He is selling discipline for sedation, selling clarity for comfort, selling power for emotional anesthesia. And the market always pays less than he thinks it will. This is why the dangerous man becomes suspicious of relief. Not joy, not resting. Relief. Because relief often arrives exactly when he is closest to a truth he has been avoiding. It appears the moment discipline is required, the moment silence becomes instructive, the moment a hard decision would begin changing his life. That is when relief knocks. That is when the weaker version of him starts sounding compassionate, reasonable, human. Take the night off. Text her back. Spend it. Skip it. Explain yourself. Start Monday. And if a man cannot hear the poison inside those soft sentences, he will call self-betrayal self-care. That is how it begins. Not with collapse, with a trade. And the worst part is that most men do not even know they are negotiating with their own future. Temporary relief is powerful because it does not arrive looking like destruction. It arrives looking like mercy. It speaks in a calm voice. It sounds intelligent. It does not tell you to ruin your life. It tells you to ease the pressure, to be kinder to yourself, to stop being so hard on yourself, to take a break before you burn out, and in the right moment, after stress, humiliation, loneliness, rejection, exhaustion. That voice can sound almost wise. But there is a difference between recovery and escape. Strong men learn it early. Weak men spend years blurring it. Recovery restores your ability to return to the fight. Escape delays your return and weakens you while pretending to help. Recovery has structure. Escape has an appetite. Recovery leaves you clearer. Escape leaves you softer, foggier, slightly more ashamed, and strangely eager to repeat the same behavior tomorrow. That is the tell. A man finishes a brutal week at work. He has been ignored in meetings, talked over by louder men, and drained by problems he keeps pretending do not bother him. He comes home with that familiar pressure in his chest, the pressure that says something in his life needs to change. Maybe his boundaries, maybe his skill level, maybe his self-respect, maybe the fact that everyone has become too comfortable with his availability. But instead of sitting with that discomfort long enough to learn from it, he reaches for relief. He orders too much food. He drowns himself in videos. He answers a message from the one person he knows pulls him backward. He tells himself he is just decompressing. No, he is interrupting awareness. And awareness is expensive, because awareness often demands action. That is why relief is seductive. It protects a man from the immediate pain of seeing himself clearly. It gives him a short corridor of numbness, where nothing has to change, nothing has to be confronted, nothing has to be admitted. For an hour, maybe 3, maybe a weekend, he gets to live in a softer version of reality, where his habits have not yet become consequences. But the consequences are patient. They wait. This is the law most men hate. Every form of temporary relief becomes permanent weakness if it is repeatedly used to avoid necessary pain. That is how a coping mechanism becomes a character flaw. That is how a bad week becomes a bad year. That is how a man who once had standards becomes someone who speaks about discipline with the tone of a historian, like he used to know it personally, a long time ago. The psychology is brutal, but simple. Your mind is built to reduce immediate discomfort first. It does not naturally care about the long-term architecture of your life. It cares about lowering stress now. This is why appetite can feel like intuition, and avoidance can feel like wisdom. Without discipline, a man becomes easy prey for any impulse that promises faster emotional relief than real change can provide. And the modern world has built entire industries around that weakness. Everything is optimized to soothe, distract, flatter, sedate, and absorb a man before he becomes dangerous. Cheap entertainment, endless stimulation, easy validation, instant access, constant noise, low-effort pleasure. It is all designed to keep him from doing the one thing that would actually alter his trajectory, sitting still long enough to face the cost of who he has become. If that truth landed harder than it should have, write clarity. Because once a man sees the pattern, temporary relief stops looking innocent. It starts looking expensive. And that is where the real war begins. Men imagine their future will be determined by major opportunities. It rarely is. Most futures are built or buried in ordinary moments, so forgettable they do not even feel historic while they are happening. It is 6:12 a.m. and the alarm goes off. He knows getting up would strengthen something, not just his body, his command, his relationship with himself, his ability to obey his own decisions. But the bed is warm, and the room is cold. Yesterday was hard, and next week feels like a better time to become disciplined. So he stays down, a small moment. But life does not seem small. Life sees repetition. He is halfway through typing a paragraph, explaining why he could not show up, why he needs more time, why he did not mean it that way, why he has just been under pressure. He knows the shorter message would carry more weight. He knows silence would carry even more. But he cannot tolerate the possibility of being misunderstood. So he explains. He offers access. He leaks uncertainty. He turns one sentence into 6. Another small moment. Another invisible trade. He is at dinner with people he has already outgrown. Same jokes, same energy, same conversations about people instead of principles, noise instead of direction. He feels it in his body now. That familiar deadness that comes from spending time where nothing in him expands. He knows he should leave earlier, withdraw more, and protect his attention. But he stays, because leaving would create friction. Another trade. Peace now, corrosion later. This is how the future disappears. Not in catastrophe. In compliance. Most men think their downfall will feel dramatic. It will not. It will feel ordinary. That is why it is so difficult to stop. They keep waiting for a crisis severe enough to justify transformation. But the most important losses happen long before visible collapse. They happen in tone, in standards, in what a man begins to tolerate, in how quickly he now reaches for relief, in how rarely he can sit in silence without trying to anesthetize himself. The future is not just some distant outcome. It is your current self repeated long enough to harden into fate. That is why the dangerous man studies his ordinary moments with more seriousness than other men study their goals. Because he knows goals are cheap without daily alignment. Vision means nothing if the small decisions beneath it are soft. A powerful future cannot be built by a man who bargains with his own standard every time discomfort enters the room. Look at the man who says he wants respect, but answers every message immediately, over-explains every no, keeps showing up where he is undervalued, keeps giving access to people who only remember him when they need something, keeps abandoning his own routines the second loneliness appears. He says he wants a different life, but his ordinary moments keep voting for the current one. And life listens to votes, not speeches. This is where most men lose the plot. They think desire should count more than behavior. They think wanting more should create momentum. But wanting is irrelevant without a pattern strong enough to carry it. A man can want power all day and still live like someone who is available for manipulation. He can want wealth all day and still spend like relief is his religion. He can want self-respect all day and still negotiate with every appetite that offers him immediate softness. The future does not care what he says he is becoming. It watches what he repeatedly chooses when no one is there to correct him. That is why ordinary moments are sacred. Because a man is never more honest than he is in the quiet. In the kitchen alone, in the parked car, in the drafted message, in the browser history, in the unstructured evening, in the hour after disappointment, in the minute after provocation, in the first 10 seconds after desire appears. That is where the future is being bartered. And the more a man understands this, the less casual he becomes with himself. He stops saying yes to things that make him smaller. He stops spending emotional energy where it will never compound. He stops mistaking relief for reward. He stops trusting moods to make decisions that consequences will have to carry. Because he finally understands, a weak future is not something that happens to a man. It is something he rehearses. Pain is not always the enemy. Sometimes early soothing is. A lot of men medicate themselves before the lesson has had time to fully land. That is why the same problem keeps returning in different clothes. The man never actually changed. He just interrupted the discomfort before it could mature into wisdom. He gets rejected and immediately runs to noise. He gets embarrassed and immediately seeks validation. He feels behind and immediately consumes content instead of acting. He gets lonely and immediately lowers his standards. He gets pressured and immediately explains himself. Every time reality tries to teach him something, he rushes to numb the class before it is over. Then, he wonders why life has to keep repeating itself, because he keeps leaving the room before the lesson is finished. There is a man staring at his banking app, late at night, watching numbers he knows should be different by now. He can feel the truth pressing against him. His problem is not just income. It is leaking. It is an appetite. It is the private transactions he keeps making with convenience. The food deliveries, the unnecessary subscriptions, the emotional purchases, the small financial sedatives he uses to feel rewarded while falling behind. That truth could change his life if he let it fully sting. But instead, he does what many men do. He avoids the sting and buys something else. Just enough pleasure to postpone the confrontation. That is not a money problem. That is a relief addiction with a wallet attached. Or, take the man after the argument. He knows she was not just angry. She was reading how easy he is to destabilize. He knows the paragraph he is about to send is not strength. It is panic trying to sound articulate. He knows silence would reveal more than speech right now. But he cannot bear the emotional pressure of being temporarily misunderstood. So he sends a long message. He thinks he is protecting the connection. He is actually teaching her exactly where his need for relief overrides his frame. This is why premature soothing is so expensive. It steals transformation at the root. Discomfort, if held correctly, clarifies. It shows you the weakness, the pattern, the appetite, the fantasy, the place where your standards collapse under pressure. But if you rush to make yourself feel better too quickly, you do not become stronger. You become temporarily calmer and structurally unchanged. And structurally unchanged men are easy to predict. The world respects the man who can stay inside discomfort long enough to extract instruction from it. Not the man who never feels pain. The man who does not immediately sell his awareness for emotional relief. That skill alone separates trajectories. It is why one man gets humbled and upgrades, while another gets humbled and spirals. One sits still, studies, sharpens, removes weakness, changes behavior. The other talks, vents, blames, consumes, seeks softness, and calls the whole process processing. Only one of them is actually moving. You can see it in the body, in the eyes, in the voice. One man gets quieter after pain because he is metabolizing it. The other gets louder because he is leaking it. And human nature reads leakage quickly. People may sympathize with it for a moment, but they do not deeply trust it. They do not build around it. They do not invest serious respect into a man who cannot contain his own discomfort without immediately trying to be rescued from it. That is another dark truth most men are not told. When you constantly soothe yourself too early, you train your nervous system to expect escape before adaptation. You weaken your tolerance for the exact tension required to build anything rare. Business requires it. Discipline requires it. Boundaries require it. Quiet confidence requires it. Strategic patience requires it. But the man who is addicted to quick emotional relief cannot hold tension long enough for any of these to become part of him. He always breaks formation too soon. If you have been doing that without naming it, write still. Because stillness is where weak habits become visible, and what becomes visible can finally be cut away. Most men do not call it fear. They call it realism. They call it timing. They call it needing space. They call it being human. They call it mental health. They call it not wanting to force things. They call it protecting peace. And sometimes those things are real. But very often, hidden inside them, there is a simpler truth a man does not want to face. He is afraid to stay in contact with pain that might require a different version of him. So he chooses relief and gives that choice a better name. He says he is resting, but he is retreating. He says he is thinking, but he is hesitating. He says he is being patient, but he is delaying. He says he is protecting his energy, but really, he is avoiding the part of growth that makes him confront how undisciplined, underbuilt, or emotionally exposed he still is. This is why relief feels moral. It protects the ego while appearing reasonable. A man keeps returning to the same woman who confuses him, because uncertainty hurts less than final separation. He says he is keeping the door open. What he is actually keeping open is access to emotional relief. The occasional reply, the tiny hit of hope, the illusion that the story is not over. And because closure would require real grief, real dignity, real withdrawal, he prefers the cheaper pain of repetition. That is what weak men do. They choose familiar suffering over corrective suffering. Corrective suffering changes you once. Familiar suffering lets you stay the same while bleeding repeatedly in a pattern you already understand. It is more comfortable because it requires less courage. No real goodbye, no hard standard, no brutal self-audit. Just the same wound, same cycle, same temporary relief every time the pressure peaks. The same thing happens at work. A man knows his environment has no ceiling worth respecting. He knows the people above him are not stronger than him, just more politically aware, more strategic, more willing to move. He knows he is being underused. But the thought of risk feels heavier than the thought of slow decay. So he stays, not because staying is wise, because staying offers temporary emotional relief from uncertainty. He would rather be quietly disappointed than openly tested. That is fear with a tie on, and fear is patient. It does not need you to collapse. It only needs you to keep postponing. Keep cushioning. Keep choosing relief in moments where decisive pain would have freed you. That is why men can spend years inside a life they know has gone stale. They are not blind. They are bargaining. They are making tiny negotiations with their own discomfort, hoping the bill will never fully arrive. But it always does. In resentment, in softness, in envy, in low-grade shame, in the strange bitterness that builds when a man keeps watching himself choose the smaller path and then has to live inside the body that knows it. This is the part nobody says clearly enough. Every time you choose temporary relief over necessary pain, your future self loses respect for you. Not motivation, respect. And once self-respect starts thinning, everything becomes harder. Discipline gets harder because the man issuing the command is no longer trusted. Boundaries get harder because the man speaking them knows he often folds. Focus gets harder because the mind follows what it respects. Even confidence gets harder because confidence without self-trust is only theater. So the real cost is not just the missed opportunity, it is erosion. The slow erosion of inner authority. And once a man understands that, he stops asking only, will this make me feel better tonight? He starts asking, what does this teach my future self about who is in charge? That question changes everything. Because now, relief is no longer innocent. It is a vote. Powerful men are not always men who feel less. Often they are men who rescue themselves later. They have trained themselves not to rush in and soothe every emotional spike the second it appears. They let the discomfort breathe long enough to reveal what it is attached to. Ego, loneliness, envy, wounded pride, sexual frustration, boredom, lack of direction, lack of consequence, false attachment, laziness with better vocabulary. They do not treat every feeling like a command. They examine it first. That is discipline in its colder form. Not waking up early for aesthetics. Not posting routines. Not performing control. Real control is the ability to experience a strong internal urge and not immediately bow to it. To feel the ache and not convert it into action too quickly. To let the mind throw its little arguments across the room and still remain seated in judgment. A man gets home after being disrespected by someone who should have corrected weeks ago. Everything in him wants immediate relief, revenge text, angry call, over-explanation, dramatic exit. Some visible act that will lower the tension in his chest. But instead, He waits. He goes quiet. He studies what actually happened. He sees the deeper truth. The disrespect started long before today. Today was just the first day he was finally in enough pain to admit it. That pause saves him. Without it, he would have reacted emotionally and missed the structural issue. That is what delayed rescue gives a man: pattern recognition. Another man loses a deal, a girl, a job, an opportunity. In the old version of himself, that pain would have been followed by some quick self-rescue ritual: validation, distraction, impulse, narrative. Now he lets the night be heavy. He lets the silence press on him. He does not romanticize the pain, but he does not interrupt it too quickly either. By morning, he knows more than he knew the night before. He knows where he overreached, where he ignored signs, where he was weak, where he was naive, where he was soft. Pain did not destroy him, it informed him. This is one of the least glamorous and most profitable masculine skills in existence: the ability to delay emotional rescue until the truth has fully surfaced. Because once the truth surfaces, the man can act cleanly. Not desperately, not theatrically, not for relief, for correction. He ends the wrong connection without writing an essay. He changes the routine instead of buying motivation. He saves the money instead of spending to feel competent. He trains because softness has become insulting to him. He stops talking about what he will become and starts removing what keeps postponing it. That shift is everything. The average man thinks self-control means suppressing desire. The sharper man understands it is really about refusing to let desire dictate timing. He does not need to deny the urge. He needs to outlast it long enough to see what it is trying to purchase. Usually, it is relief from discomfort he should actually learn to carry. And once he learns to carry it, he becomes harder to control, harder to tempt, harder to bait, harder to manipulate through attention, urgency, sex, approval, or soothing language. Why? Because so much of manipulation depends on one thing: offering a man relief faster than his discipline can respond. The dangerous man closes that gap. He slows the transaction down. He notices the text and does not answer yet. He notices the urge to spend and waits another day. He notices the impulse to explain and keeps the sentence short. He notices loneliness and still refuses access to the wrong person. He notices anger and withholds expression until the response becomes useful instead of dramatic. This is where authority begins, not in domination over others, in control over the exact moment you used to abandon yourself. If this is the discipline you are building now, write control. Because the man who can delay emotional rescue long enough to stay aligned with his future is no longer easy to break. Temporary relief does not only steal outcomes, it changes posture. It changes the way a man walks into rooms, the way he speaks, the kind of behavior he tolerates, the level of respect he can command without saying much. Because every repeated act of self-betrayal lowers internal rank. And once internal rank drops, a man starts compensating in visible ways. He becomes louder, more defensive, more available, more reactive, more eager to explain, more desperate to be understood, more likely to accept low-value attention because he no longer believes he can command better, more likely to posture because his center is weak and he needs the outside world to keep telling him he still matters. This is why relief addiction is never just private. It eventually becomes social. A man who keeps choosing temporary relief becomes easier to read, easier to pressure, easier to flatter into foolishness, easier to keep in a loop. He might still speak about ambition, power, discipline, self-respect, but human beings read patterns faster than language. They feel when a man's standards are inconsistent. They notice when his words carry less consequence than his image suggests. A woman notices it when he says he is done, but keeps answering. Friends notice it when he complains about being used, but remains permanently reachable. Co-workers notice it when he talks about boundaries, but folds under urgency. The family notices it when he says he is changing, but still responds to every old trigger the same way. No one needs a confession. Patterns confess on their own. And that is the deepest cost. Temporary relief turns a man into someone whose future intentions no longer carry force in the present. He says he is building, but he is interruptible. He says he wants more, but he is purchasable by comfort. He says he is serious, but the smallest discomfort can still pull him off his line. That is not just disappointing, it is visible. And the world treats visible weakness accordingly, not always cruelly, often casually. Respect simple things. People talk over him a little more, push a little harder, ask for a little more, trust his standards a little less. The change is subtle, but a man can feel it. Suddenly his no carries less weight. His silence feels less chosen. His boundaries get tested more often. His presence stops altering the room the way it could. Why? Because presence is built on private congruence. When a man repeatedly chooses relief over alignment, his presence loses density. He becomes emotionally negotiable. And negotiable men are rarely respected beyond convenience. This is why the men you admire often feel heavier even when they say less. It is not magic. It is withheld betrayal. It is self-command compounded over time. It is the absence of private transactions with weakness. Not perfection. Precision. They have not won because life was easier on them. They have won because they stopped giving every moment of discomfort the authority to redirect their behavior. That creates weight. Weight in the eyes. Weight in the voice. Weight in the pause before a response. Weight in a short answer. Weight in a boundary that does not come wrapped in apology. And weight is what most men have been losing every time they thought they were simply taking the edge off. No, you were thinning your own force. That realization hurts, but it also frees a man. Because once he sees the price clearly, he can stop pretending the trade was harmless. He can stop calling repeated relief neutral. He can stop acting confused about why his life does not feel solid, even when he knows all the right ideas. Ideas do not build solidity. Unbroken patterns do. And every time a man honors his future when relief is available, he adds another brick back into his own foundation. Most men are night thinkers. They think from the pressure of the current emotion, the current urge, the current loneliness, the current exhaustion, the current embarrassment, the current need to feel better. That is why their decisions keep mortgaging years to improve evenings. The more dangerous man thinks differently. He has taught himself to bring the future into the room before he decides. Not in a sentimental way, in a ruthless one. He sees the older version of himself watching, not the fantasy version on a vision board. The real man he is becoming through repetition. He asks whether tonight's decision would make that man stronger, sharper, cleaner, harder to manipulate, more sovereign, or whether it would simply help him avoid discomfort for a few hours while making tomorrow weaker. That lens changes everything. He is sitting with his phone in his hand, staring at the name he should not press. He already knows the conversation would give him relief. Familiar voice, familiar warmth, familiar trap. For one night, he would not feel as alone. But now another thought enters the room. What does this choice cost the man I am trying to become? Not the mood I am managing. The man. Suddenly the call is no longer harmless. It has a strategic cost. Or he is deciding whether to keep spending his weekends around people who drain him, because being alone still feels too sharp. He knows staying connected to dead energy gives immediate relief from solitude. But he also knows it delays a harder and more valuable development, becoming a man who can endure his own company long enough to refine it. Once he thinks in decades, the temporary comfort loses some of its charm. That is the shift. A boy asks, how do I feel right now? A man asks, what does this train me to become? One is mood-based. One is identity-based. And identity-based men accumulate power because they keep making decisions that serve a larger structure than the emotion of the hour. That does not make them robotic. It makes them ordered. They still feel tired, angry, tempted, disappointed, overlooked, needy, horny, frustrated, bitter, bored, rejected. The difference is that these states no longer outrank the future in the decision hierarchy. That is rare. And anything rare begins to command value. You can see the opposite everywhere. Men who are bright but impulsive, capable but unstructured, charismatic but undisciplined, visionary in speech, fragile in pattern. They keep sacrificing the long game for emotional management in the short game, then wondering why nothing compounds. But compounding requires loyalty to what does not pay immediately. The body, the business, the skill, the standard, the silence, the clean exit, the withheld impulse, the boring repetition that keeps a man in command of his own direction. That is why the future belongs to men who can survive nights that lesser men keep spending their lives trying to escape. A hard night can build a dangerous man if he does not bargain it away too quickly. He can sit with the urge and still not indulge it. Sit with loneliness and still not lower the standard. Sit with the shame and still not distract himself from the truth. Sit with uncertainty and still not buy fake certainty from noise. Sit with pressure and still keep the promise. That is long-game masculinity. And it looks quiet from the outside, almost invisible. No dramatic speech, no heroic soundtrack, just a man in a private room, repeatedly refusing trades that would make him cheaper tomorrow. That is how futures are protected. Not by inspiration, by refusing to sell. The first step is brutal honesty. You have to stop calling the trade something else. Stop calling it a break when it is avoidable. Stop calling it patience when it is fear. Stop calling it closure when it is accessed. Stop calling it compassion when it is surrendered. Stop calling it realism when it is a refusal to endure the discomfort required for a different life. The second step is to identify your relief pattern precisely. Every man has one. For one man, it is over-explaining. He cannot handle misunderstanding, so he leaks status for emotional relief. For another, it is women. The second he feels empty, he reaches outward. For another, it is spending. He buys control because he has not built it. For another, it is comfort consumption. Food, porn, entertainment, endless scrolling, anything that blurs the edge of what he should be confronting. For another, it is busy. He keeps himself overwhelmed, so he never has to sit with the fact that he is building nothing. Find your pattern and name it without romance. The third step is to create a delay between urge and action. Not forever, just long enough to bring the future back into the room. 10 minutes. 1 hour. 1 night. Long enough for the emotion to lose some of its authority. Long enough to ask, what is this actually trying to buy me right now? Relief from what? And what would happen if I carried that discomfort instead of cashing out to make it disappear? The fourth step is replacement, not emptiness. Men fail when they only remove relief, but do not install a stronger ritual. If he cuts the escape but leaves a void, appetite will return with better arguments. So the man who wants his future back needs replacement behaviors that restore order instead of anesthesia. Walk, journal, train, read, sleep, save the money, put the phone away, write a short message and stop. Sit in the dark if necessary. But do not keep paying relief to shut the lesson down. The fifth step is consequence. A man changes faster when the trade becomes embarrassing to him, not in a self-hating way, in a standard way. He has to reach a point where certain forms of relief no longer feel pleasurable because they expose a version of him he refuses to keep feeding. That is maturity. Not that temptation disappears, that some temptations start costing too much dignity to enjoy. There is a man standing in his kitchen at 10 p.m., reaching for the exact habit that has kept him soft, distracted, and slightly ashamed for years. Tonight, nothing external stops him. No audience, no accountability, no dramatic intervention. Just a pause, just a thought, just the realization that every time he gives in here, he trains himself to trust comfort over command. He puts it back, not because he is suddenly transformed, because he finally sees the transaction clearly. That is how transformation actually begins. Not in noise, in interrupted patterns. And once a man interrupts enough of them, something powerful happens. He starts liking himself again. Not in the fragile, motivational sense, in the older, heavier sense. The sense that comes when his private behavior becomes less humiliating to his future. That changes posture immediately. He looks people in the eye differently. His no becomes cleaner. His silence loses panic. His attention becomes more expensive. He stops seeking as much reassurance because his life is starting to produce evidence he can actually trust. This is how men get their future back. Not by fantasizing about reinvention, by cutting the private trades that kept selling it away. If that is the line you are drawing now, write no more. Because the moment a man stops trading tomorrow for relief, his life becomes dangerous in a way average people cannot fully understand. In the end, this is not about comfort. It is about command. Not whether you feel pain, not whether you get tired, not whether the pressure is real. It is real. The loneliness is real. The frustration is real. The temptation is real. The humiliation, boredom, envy, uncertainty, exhaustion, all real. The question is simpler than that. Who gets to convert that pressure into a decision? The appetite or the man? Because every night, every silence, every urge, every little private moment where relief appears and asks for access, those are not random moments. They are auditions. They are checking who is in charge. They are asking whether the future you talk about is actually outranked by the discomfort of the present. They are asking whether your standards hold only when life is light, or whether they still have teeth when your mood turns against you. Most men fail there. They fail quietly, with good reasons, with believable explanations, with temporary softness that feels deserved. They fail without drama, and therefore without immediate shame. Then years later, they look at their life and call it bad luck, bad timing, betrayal, circumstances, the economy, the wrong people, being misunderstood, needing more time. But a deeper part of them knows. It was not always the world. A lot of it was trade. The repeated decision to purchase emotional relief with long-term cost. The accumulated habit of lowering standards whenever pain entered the room. The inability to let discomfort sharpen them instead of steering them. Do not be that man. There is another version available, a quieter one. Heavier, less explainable. He still gets hit. I still feel tired, still bleeding. I still want relief sometimes. But he has changed one thing that changes everything. He no longer gives temporary feelings the authority to negotiate with permanent consequences. He lets pain speak before he silences it. He lets truth land before he anesthetizes it. He lets the hard night do its work. He lets the future sit at the table before making the choice. And because of that, little by little, his life stops leaking. The body gets harder, the money gets cleaner, the attention gets sharper, the standards get simpler, the voice gets calmer, the presence gets heavier, the respect returns. Not because the world became kinder, because the transactions stopped. That is what maturity looks like in its colder, more sovereign form. Not constant motivation, not dramatic reinvention, not public declarations every week. just a man becoming less available to the exact impulses that used to keep him ordinary. So tonight, when the familiar relief shows up, and it will, do not ask only what it gives you. Ask what it takes. Ask what it trains. Ask whether this is relief, or whether it is weakness asking to be paid again. Because your future is not far away. It is not waiting at the end of some grand cinematic breakthrough. It is being decided in the next private moment, where no one sees the trade but you. And if you hold the line there, even once, then again, something starts happening that no motivational speech can fake. You stop feeling like a man with potential. You start becoming a man with weight. If this gave language to something you have been living but not naming, leave a like. In the comments, tell me which line hit hardest. And subscribe if you want more videos built for men who are done being ruled by what only feels good for a moment.